Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get yourself a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. With over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, man, you're spoiled for choice with something to listen to. So I know what you're going to do as soon as this show is ended. You're going to head over to audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro and pick yourself up something free today.
Now hear this. The following podcast is likely to contain numerous instances of vulgarity or profanity, which some may deem inappropriate. If you're of an overly sensitive disposition, stop listening now. Additionally, the podcast will be filled with numerous spoilers throughout, so if you haven't had an opportunity to read, watch, or enjoy the story prior to this broadcast, please do so, before continuing with this episode of Sweet Story, Bro.
Get ready for action! 3, 2, 1, fight!
Hey, welcome to another episode of Sweet Story Bro, the place for geek story reviews. You love this geeky stuff, I love this geeky stuff, so let's all get together and talk about this fucking geeky stuff. So first off, thank you for checking out this episode of Sweet Story Bro and downloading it to your podcast listening device of choice, whether that happens to be through iTunes or the podcast app or Stitcher, because you've got Android now. Hey, no excuses. You can check us out on Stitcher, download the app, all the good stuff for you Google Android users as well, available at your fingertips. And I really hope you enjoyed the last show, man. You know, reviewing High Rise, Tom Hiddleston starring in Ben Wheatley's take and Amy Jump's take on High Rise, J.G. Ballard's novel, sorry. And I just want to say, if you missed the stream of Uncharted Drake's Fortune that we did for the retrospective, because remember, there was a sweet update, bro, on the YouTube. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube, be sure to head over there and hit subscribe so you don't miss this stuff going forward. But we had a stream on July 3rd for the game. It is up on the Twitch still, which is SSB Podcast, or the YouTube. So, hey, if you're going over there to sub for the updates, don't worry, you'll get the video there too after the fact. But if you want to join us as we go forward, as we play the game, well, you have the option and you have the opportunity to. We would love to have you along for the ride in the chat rooms, talking with us about games, about the stories that you love, why you like Uncharted, why you might not like Uncharted, you know, all this stuff. I want to engage, and that was one of the big reasons to do this. Plus the fact that obviously the retrospective came out on top in the Twitter poll, and I'm working towards that. You know, I said this in the update. I'm not going to rush it. The last thing that I should do is rush it, because it would just be absolutely horrendous if I did. So we're going through the entire games, playing them where we can, and eventually the retrospective will come out, so that's something to look forward to. Frankly, it's a blast going back and playing these games and re-experiencing them with my friend Jamie, taking notes as we go along, and the research comes later, obviously, and the story writing mechanics that they utilize and the choices that they made. But that's part of the fun. I'm bound to learn something about these games, these really, really popular games that I didn't know before because of this podcast, because I'll be trying to understand the writing process and the writing choices behind what happened. I mean, it's almost interesting, honestly, to be doing this retrospective right now in the old style, I suppose, but potentially the old style. There's a Twitter poll running right now. It would have ended by the time that this episode is released, but I've been tweeting about it. I put videos up about it, and I really, really am interested to know what you guys wanted from this podcast. Are you enjoying the in-depth plot by plot, you know, plot point by plot point, beat by beat breakdown to understand how writing works and how they push the story forward, character arcs, development, all this stuff to understand the story better? Or do you want a more sort of rounded, less detail-oriented review? The shows are bound to be a lot shorter if that's what you want, and if that is what you want, that's not a problem at all. I want to create a product that you guys want to listen to, and if it is just a more straightforward, almost generic style review, I'm happy to do that, you know? Still be my voice, still be my take on it, still be my style, but it'd just be a slightly different show because of it, you know? It wouldn't be this really in-depth breakdown that the show was initially built upon. But I'm all for change, man. I'm happy to evolve, like I say, if it's something that you guys wanted. So I hope you took the time I hope you took the 5 seconds that it could take to cast your vote, to have your voice heard, to help me with the show, to give you the content that you want. Because that's all I want to do, man. Keep podcasting, have you guys come back, listen, engage, and let me know. Just let me know. That's all I'm asking. You can do that at the Twitter, You can find all the links that you need at sweetstorybro.com. Whether you want to let me know on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, iTunes. You can subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher as well, of course. But everything that you need for the show all in one place, just hit up sweetstorybro.com. All your means of contacting me to let me know your thoughts on the show, what you want to see me review, if you want me to be as in-depth and it is in detail as the previous reviews are, and this one will be too, because I don't know the results of the vote yet. Like I say, I'm recording this at a time when the vote is still happening. It's still going on, so it can go either way. I just want you to have your say, to help me. Give me that feedback, man. So why this story? Why The Man in the High Castle? A book about Nazis and the Japanese and American culture if they lost the war. If World War II didn't go the Allies' ways and England and America lost, as well as the rest of the Allied forces, of course. Why that story? Well, come on. That's such a simple concept, but it's so good. It's so good. How can you not be gripped by that? The Nazis win the war. This is what would happen through the prism of Philip K. Dick, of course. It's such a simple idea, but one that is so ripe for just interpretation and there's a million stories you can write with this idea. This just happens to be the one that Philip K. Dick did. I love the Amazon series. I was a big fan of that TV show, and I watched it. I was absolutely fucking hooked. Thea less so. She didn't really get into it in the way that I did. She hasn't even seen the last episode yet, but I soaked that stuff up. I thought the atmosphere was great. I thought the concept was seriously amazing. The costume design, everything about how they rooted you within that world was done so phenomenally well. And I was immediately taken with the premise and the execution of the show, and I just wanted to know more about it. And I wanted to know what happened next. Now, for those who haven't seen The Man in the High Castle, the TV show, spoiler, the end of season 1 ends with one of the characters sitting in a park, and he closes his eyes, and as it opens again, he's in our world, our reality. He's in modern-day America at that time, 62, something like that. But he's in the version of America where America won. And how did he get there? That becomes the big question. Where does he go? What happens here? What could honestly happen next? And then the season fucking ends. Season 2 has been announced, which is great. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that. But it didn't take me long from cracking the spine of this book to understand the differences that exist between the novel and the TV show. There are a lot of similarities. There are. A lot of characters exist across both mediums, although in different ways. And, the character in one is not necessarily the same character in the other one. But you can definitely see the difference. I have to stress, this is not a comparison podcast. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just going to be talking about the book, the original book by science fiction maestro Philip K. Dick. And so, with that out the way, man, let's start talking about The Man in the High Castle. Let's fucking look at this book. Now, the way that Philip K. Dick writes is not immediately accessible. It drops us straight into the action as a character called Childen. Childen greets a Japanese couple to his antique store. This guy owns the antique store that deals with American antiquities. So a lot of the stuff that was pre-war America, now that the Japanese have come in and taken over with the PSA, which is the Pacific States of America, they enjoy the trinkets of old America. They find them cute, quirky, things like that. And almost, is it endearing? I'm not too sure, honestly. Almost insulting, I suppose, to look at something like a bottle cap, a Coca-Cola bottle cap, and they've imbued meaning onto it. This is clever world building straight from the off. So for the authors and writers and people who are interested in story build-up, pay attention. The clever world building through his character and through this scene immediately, it develops where we are socially. People refer to Americans as Yanks in a very an almost insulting way. When people use that term within this novel, they certainly don't mean it in a friendly, jovial manner. And we immediately understand that there's a power shift where America doesn't have all the cards because they lost the war. This guy, Chilton, replicates Japanese custom quite a bit. You get that with how Philip K. Dick presents him as he's writing him. It's staggered English, almost broken the way that it comes across to read it out loud. He greets them and arranges to visit them as they're new to the country, they're new to the state, to help them furnish their new home with old American antiques from before the war for a couple who, quote, did not remember the days before the war or even the war itself, end quote. So it goes to show that we are at least a generation, 2 generations away from the end of the war at this point. And we are, I think we're based in 62 or something like that, late 50s, early 60s for the entire duration of this novel. And it's an interesting one, honestly, the way that it's not immediately after the war, and I think that was a great choice by Philip K. Dick to do that. It's not the aftermath. It's what happens to the culture and to the society once a new status quo is established. And he drops us straight into it. It's very clever. You know, he doesn't really hold our hand. It's not the same as in media res, because we're not in an action scene. We're cutting as close to the action as possible, but we're not flashing back at all. So it's not media res before any longtime listener goes, hang on a minute, like you don't like that storytelling technique too much. That much is true, but this is not it. And he does it very well. He handles it very well in order to develop the characters immediately and to also to set a social climate and a frame of time as well. It's good work across the board. Even, again, I can't stress this enough, to read this, if you were to pick up this book and give it a go, the writing style is very odd. It's not easily accessible. During this scene where he's talking with the young Japanese couple, I mean, he's initially on the phone to a character called Mr. Tagomi, where a meeting is made between them as well in order to share some of his wares for an important guest who's flying in to visit Mr. Tagomi. So Chilton seems to be a little bit of a mover and a shaker. You know, he's got links to people within high positions of power within offices and things like that who host important foreign visitors. And it's his wares that they want to show off, to gift, to grant to somebody else, which is a very high honor, I would suppose. I mean, Philip K. Dick has this to say on beginning writing The Man in the High Castle, the process that helped him initially get into it. And this is taken from a website called philipkdickfans.com, and I quote, "I started with nothing more but the name Mr. Tagomi written on a scrap of paper, no other notes. I'd been reading a lot of Oriental philosophy, reading a lot of Zen Buddhism, reading the I Ching. That was the Marin country zeitgeist at that point, Zen Buddhism and the I Ching. I just started right out and kept on trucking. It was either that or go back to polishing jewelry," end quote. It's interesting. Remember that. The fact that his other option in life, his real life, would be to go back to, quote, polishing jewelry. Within the book, though, we then get resettled with another character called Frank. This scene elaborates upon suspicion. The West lost the war. Frank casually drops in German words or sayings as he speaks, which is a nice sort of obvious integration of cultures, because if you've been taken over, they come over and establish themselves within America. True for Japanese as it would be for German, it's natural that there would be an assimilation of cultural points, whether it's just frequent sayings or whatever it happens to be. And it just goes to show how ingrained German culture has become a part of American culture since their loss. The quote that I pulled from the book was, and I quote, "Norma Prout was the class schönes Mädchen, and he really had vowed to marry her," end quote. Now, I don't know what that means. In fact, let me Google it. All right, and with the power of Google, I've already done that. Turns out that it means beautiful girl. So Norma Prout was the class beautiful girl. And just little things like that, little terms, just find their way into your natural language, and things assimilate. Different cultures assimilate like that, especially with something like Germany coming in, a Nazi regime, a fascist regime, no less, taking over the West. Now, he's late to work. I mean, how many stories have started with the guy wakes up and he's late for something and he has to rush. I'll tell you what, a lot of fucking short stories start that way. I'm pretty, to my experience, and also a high number of short movies. So many movies end up this way and begin this way to give an idea of, oh, this character is irresponsible, this character, yada, yada, yada. I guess even that is maybe when Philip K. Dick wrote this, that wasn't the trope that it is today. Maybe he was the guy who helped originate it, but it's certainly a stereotype as it exists right now. But what's not stereotypical is what he does. He's late to work and so consults the oracle sticks over what to do, the I Ching. Modesty, it seems, is the answer. To go in and be modest over everything that's happened. The fact is, they try not to be proud, or anything like that. One thing to note as well with this book, with this version of this story, Germany are manning flights to space. Quote, it was a fact. The Pacific had done nothing toward colonization of the planets, end quote. It's crazy to think. I mean, it's almost an odd side story, and this is never really developed throughout the entire book, and it certainly, I don't believe, was touched on within the TV show at all. So this integration of space travel, although cool and definitely sci-fi, it seems a little bit unwarranted. Like, you could have easily lifted that and not missed anything at all. We learn about his ex-wife, the fact he has an ex-wife called Juliana. Another question pops in his mind, and so he consults the sticks once again. His question is quite straightforward. Will I ever see Juliana again? So they're not together. We don't have an idea just yet about their relationship, although it seems to be somewhat contentious. He wants to see her, it seems, but he doesn't know if he ever will. Why won't he? Why won't she agree to meet him? A lot of questions just immediately rise out of this situation. So it grips you with intrigue, you know? Oh, okay, cool. Why are you guys apart? What happened for you to be this way? And this scene works for a couple of reasons. It develops Frank as a character. It introduces some of his desire and goals within this universe, as well as furthers this idea of Asian culture assimilating with Western culture, just in the same way that the German words does or has done with American culture. Here we have Frank, who is as his own description, a New York Jew consulting sticks taken from a Chinese method of reading them for prophecy or advice. Putting too much stock into throwing sticks and then comparing the sticks to what the book says and letting whatever the book has to say run your life for you, essentially. It generates answers, and you can glean anything from these answers. It's like fortune cookie stuff. Yes, that's what it comes across as within this book. I think somebody even kind of puts it down for that very reason during the course of the novel. And I find this very interesting, actually. Americans consulting a Chinese method of fortune or advice, cosmology advice, cosmological advice, considering they're living within a Japanese rule. And I was able to find a really interesting quote that directly relates to this, actually. And it's from a Mr. Kawaguchi, who responded to a letter from Philip K. Dick in regards to the Japanese translation of the book. Philip K. Dick was very excited when Japan was getting its own version of it, translated into Japanese, that he reached out to the publisher and he had all these questions regarding it, and he wanted it to do really, really well. He wondered if it was well received, etc. And again, this is taken from philipkdickfans.com. Once more, just to stress, this is Kawaguchi responding to Philip K. Dick. And I quote, "First of all," he said, "your book wasn't any good to start with. Secondly," he said, "you've also confused Chinese culture and Japanese culture. The Chinese are inferior people, and the I Ching's Chinese and not Japanese. No Japanese would ever use some Confucian classic. Only foreigners use those," end quote. Pretty aggressive, pretty in your face. There's definitely no wiggle room within that. And I'll be honest, when I started reading it, this was one of the very first things that jumped out to me as well. They're putting so much faith and stock into this. But, I mean, despite how much Philip K. Dick claims to have researched for this book, there's this fundamental flaw in this very fact. The I Ching is Chinese, not Japanese. So why would he be using this within an integrated culture with Japan? It doesn't make sense. And it's a little bit of a huge oversight on Philip K. Dick's part, I think. And honestly, I mean, this won quite a lot of awards. A Hugo Award, I believe, was the big one that helped really skyrocket it into publication and awareness and things like that. And without being rude, without being harsh, I'm guessing that the culture of America at that time probably didn't know the difference. They probably didn't care about the difference. American arrogance can get in the way of a lot of things, and that's probably just one of them. Is, hey, Chinese, Japanese, whatever, same thing. No, it's not. It's really, really not. And you need to kind of open your eyes and be aware of that a little bit more. And I think that could possibly be why nobody really called him out on it at the time when it was first released, when it first got written. Because surely somebody had to know. Somebody had to notice this. But again, different time, different place. That's probably why it didn't get called up on. We get situated now with Tagomi. And there's a number of key characters that we'll jump between over the course of this story. And he reflects over his upcoming meeting with a guy called Mr. Baines. He's the one who's coming to visit that he wants children to provide a gift for in the first place, from the very first chapter. Tagomi-san himself, is consulting the oracle sticks too. He, being of Japanese descent, makes it all the more odder, given everything we've just spoken about, I suppose. Quote, Reich trade has kept an edge over Pacific trade, and in technology, the Reich was at least 10 years ahead. Quote. End quote. This is something that he said during the course of his chapter, which I found very interesting, but minor. It's minor but interesting, because the addition just adds flavor to this world, especially when juxtaposed with our own. And so many times during the writing of this book, so many times the points that Philip K. Dick makes are so poignant only when contrasted with our own reality. That's what makes it so powerful. This, for example, the world we live in, the Asian populations are very advanced with technology. Japan, China, Korea, very good internet speeds, really advanced concepts and ideas for how to utilize technology. The West kind of lag in that area. So in this reality, for that to be completely flipped on its head and the Germans to be leading the charge with, what do they say, the Japanese at least 10 years, they're 10 years ahead of the Japanese. You can't fathom that in this and within the reality we live in. But over there, it's every day. It's just interesting. Again, it's only interesting when you compare it with our own reality. Philip K. Dick had this to say once more on the writing of The Man in the High Castle. And he actually considers Tagomi as a main character, if not the main character. PhilipKDickFans.com. And I quote, I had gotten involved with my quondam wife's jewelry business, polishing silver and the like, as depicted in the novel. As far as I was concerned, the period in my life in which I was a sci-fi writer had ended, not with a bang and not even a whimper. But then one day, as I was driving to my cabin in Inverness, California, a thought entered my mind. Mr. Tagomi. I got to the cabin, wrote down his name, then I saw him seated in his office, keeping the ultimate of evil at bay in his own small fashion. And with no further planning or notes, I wrote the book. End quote. Ties into the quote I used earlier, but really highlights that in his mind, Tagomi is the central character to this book. And it's really interesting how he's got this idea that he's trying to keep away the ultimate evil from behind the desk, doing everything that he can, as small as it is, to keep it at bay. Dick writes children in a first-person present tense as he journeys to his meeting with Tagomi. He constantly, and I'm going to directly lift from the book here because this is not a nice term. I'm only going to use it the once, all right? He constantly refers to the Chinese pedal driver as a chink, and he does that throughout the book, constantly dropping that in. But again, with this concept in mind that the Japanese consider the Chinese to be an inferior peoples, this attitude would have pervaded into the American consciousness as well. Hence here. I mean, Chilton himself, it's worth mentioning, he's doing everything he can to be as Asian as possible, despite being white. He's a white American man. But he's doing everything he can to embrace the Asian culture as much as possible. He tries to look at his own antiques through a Japanese eye, as opposed to looking at it as something that has something to do with his own personal history, which they do. He completely disassociates himself from the history and the fact that, oh, these are from a bygone era when we had independence and weren't ruled over by a fascist dictatorship. it's interesting. Chilton is a very, I think, conflicted character internally, emotionally. He has this to say, and it's an interesting attitude to have. I quote, and this is Chilton speaking here. Now, the Japanese, on the other hand, I know them pretty well. I do business with them after all, day in and day out. They are, let's face it, Orientals. Yellow people. We whites have to bow down to them because they hold the power. But we watch Germany. We see what can be done where whites have conquered, and it's quite different, end quote. A lot of racial tension exists within this world. This just hammers that home. As much as they're trying to assimilate, they're also trying to hold on to a sense of cultural identity. And yet, at the same time, like he says, they're watching Germany, and they're comparing themselves to that. Oh, it's interesting. That's all it is interesting. We meet Juliana now. We're now rooted with her, Frank's ex-wife, in case you forgot, who makes a living in the Rockies teaching judo, of all things. She seems torn over living in this area, yet not wanting to be back in San Francisco, where we learn the Japanese did, quote, everything to her. The inference is loud and clear, and a clear reason as to why she wouldn't want to be there and why she left in the first place. But why did she leave Frank? She meets two truckers in a diner, one called Joe, in Charlie's Diner, it's actually named, where they strike up a tense conversation, especially when they talk about Jews. Charlie, the fry chef, the owner of the diner, has this to say, and again, this is one of those lines that you could so easily miss, but it really, really hammers on so much. Quote, I never thought I'd see that Nazi racial law get passed in the U.S., even if we did lose the war, end quote. And this is a heavy, heavy thing to think about, because this Nazi racial law that he's talking about is still in reference to burning the Jews. They still have this stuff in place within this world. And we're talking about years and years and years after the war has ended. They're still implementing something as atrocious as that. It's sickening. It truly is. And this is the world they live in. The major thing to take away from this, however, is Juliana's immediate interest in the surly trucker Joe and the relationship that comes out of this interest in him. We meet Baines now. He's on a flight over. As we know, he's meeting Tagomi, and Chilton's involved as well. But Baines has some interesting thoughts on the German situation in this post-war situation. We also discover that he is a Jew himself, hidden. He's had reconstructive surgery and stuff to hide this fact. As he talks to a guy on the plane who's just, well, the other guy talks to him. He doesn't really want to talk to him. And the other guy is very, very pro-Nazi. He's an artist, apparently. He's very, very pro-Nazi, very, very pro-German and Reich. And he's incredibly anti-Semitic. And in a bit of a fuck you moment, Baines admits about his Jewishness to him and threatens him, saying, if you tell anyone I have friends in high up places, higher up than anybody you might know, if I want to get you in trouble, I can say, oh, hey, you're a Jew. See what happens there. Convinces him to keep his mouth shut. But these are Baines' thoughts. Quote, they, the Germans, want to be the agents, not the victims of history. They identify with God's power and believe they are godlike. That is their basic madness. It is not hubris, not pride. It is inflation of the ego to its ultimate, confusion between him who worships and that which is worshipped. Man has not eaten God. God has eaten man, end quote. Some powerful writing, I think, there. As a damnation, really, on Philip K. Dick's part. A lot of the author, I think, comes through within this Baines thought process. And Baines is Swedish, or he claims to be Swedish within this book. They're on a political mission of some sort. Frank attempts to save face when he goes to work. Remember, he was late. He woke up late, consulted the sticks to see even what to do. Modesty, that was the key, it said. He claims that he's only there for his tools when confronted by his old boss, as well as his workmate and friend, Ed. His friend actually attempts to convince him to start a jewelry business with him, or to simply take his counterfeit skills into his own hands. And this is interesting because, like I said earlier, I told you to remember the fact that if he wasn't doing this, writing man in the High Castle, he would go back to working for his wife's jewelry store, polishing jewelry. What's nice about this is in how the now prolific Philip K. Dick, because at that time, I suppose he might have been on the uprise, the upswing there, but he wasn't Philip K. Dick in the way that we talk about him now. He's not revered in the same way that we look back on his work now. But he does what every writer should do, an absolute tenement that's been espoused every creative writing session I've done, every screenwriting session I've done when I was learning. Write what you know, because only you know it best. It is your personal voice. It's funny actually, I mentioned about going to see Kevin Smith a few weeks ago. That's obviously been and gone, and he did his Q&A, and he went over, of course, because it's Kevin Smith. But he talked about how your voice is so unique. That is your currency. Your currency is your voice, your life story, because only you can tell it. No matter how you might look at something, your unique outlook, upbringing, and all the experiences that you've had allow you to have something specific to say about it. I wrote a blog post about this on writestevewright.com. Do check it out. It's called Voice. Do check it out. Philip K. Dick has this to say, quote, "Man in the High Castle was an anomaly in my writing. I had given up writing. I'd actually decided to give up writing and was helping my wife in her jewelry business. And I wasn't happy. She was giving me all the shit parts to do, and I decided to pretend I was writing a book. And I said, well, I'm writing a very important book, and to make the fabrication convincing, I actually had to start typing. And I had no notes. I had nothing in mind, except for years I'd wanted to write that idea about Germany and Japan actually having beaten the United States. And without any notes, I simply sat down and began to write, simply to get out of the jewelry business," end quote. Again, highlighting the same thing we mentioned earlier. But that's so refreshing to hear. You forget. I forget. Everybody forgets, man. Philip K. Dick wasn't once Philip K. Dick. Kevin Smith once wasn't Kevin Smith. Fuck it. Steven Spielberg at one point wasn't Steven Spielberg. You follow me? And it's so relatable to hear what he's saying here. That he was helping with a business venture that didn't interest him. He hated it, and he wanted to go back to writing. And in order to do it, he took elements of what he knew from his life. Jewelry making. It's a pretty cool inclusion, well, I think. This weird sort of crossover of his life with this. Helps ground the story as well as make Philip K. Dick as an author immediately relatable. I love that quote. I'm glad that I found it. We then go to Chilton, who discovers through an interested buyer, somebody comes in, views his wares, claims to represent an admiral within the Japanese army, and then just absolutely discredits everything that's in his store. The Colt 44 pistol that he was shown, in fact, the guns that he has in his store are all fakes, and this is enough to ruin him. This guy was on the cusp of making a huge sale, a huge purchase for Chilton. And then he just goes along and highlights that, yeah, all your stuff is fake. I'm not buying this. You should be ashamed, and you need to go and look into who provided this to you, and they should be shamed too. This is a big moment, and we just need to take a second to remember this man who came in to discredit everything in his store, all the guns, all fakes. There's a really interesting argument over the attribution of value with a scene featuring a character called Wyndham Matson, and that's the boss of Frank Frank. Quote, "A paper of authenticity. And so it's all a fake, a masked illusion. The paper proves its worth, not the object itself," end quote. I found that to be a really interesting argument over collectors' mindsets. And I mean, that's enough for a whole podcast by itself, totally unrelated to what Sweet Stories Bro's about. But there are a lot of people out there who collect stuff, and there are a lot of people who will pay a lot of money for objects that are either old or rare or whatever it happens to be. But as Philip K. Dick quite rightly puts it, through his cynical, real, I consider, maybe I'm cynical in this regard, but I consider it to be a more realistic and pragmatic view. You're imbuing power, you're imbuing meaning and value into something. Because what you're doing is you're paying for a certificate that tells you that this is an important thing. And then once you have that paper, it is then an important thing, but only because you have a certificate of authenticity of some sort. And that's still true today. You get collectors all over the world paying thousands, millions and millions for things, pieces of paper This is a theme that runs throughout this book, so do remember that. This theme of imbuing meaning into otherwise meaningless objects. Now, he goes on to have a discussion with his mistress over a book that actually belongs to his wife. She spots it on the bottom shelf within their living room, I believe. The book is called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. And that's meant to be taken from a biblical verse, apparently. The book basically accounts our history to a degree, just to a degree, in leading the Allies to victory, with the Allies coming out victorious over the German Nazi Reich. This alternate theory, presented as fiction within their universe, of course, it's clever. It's sci-fi, in my opinion, which is interesting because apparently a lot of people didn't consider this book to be science fiction. But when you're talking about parallel realities or alternate timelines and things like this and how they can bleed into one another, as is insinuated at least here, how's that not science fiction? Now, the current reigning German Reich Chancellor dies, and that leaves an opening for somebody within their cabinet to step up. And there's a lot of power play going on in order to assign this new role. And what Philip K. Dick does is quite clever. We learn about all of this through Tagomi's perspective. Don't forget that Tagomi is pretty much the main protagonist. As he joins his fellow Japanese ministers, we are given a rundown of each candidate. He finds out that the German Reich Chancellor is dead, and then they go through each of the candidates. So as they are receiving this information new for the first time, so are we as the reader. So are we as the audience member. It's a clever way to give us that information. And it also highlights the real Nazis. He's talking about people that existed, Goebbels, people like that. I think I said that right, Goebbels? Gerbils? People like that existed within the Reich. And here we are talking about them within a reality that's many, many, many moons after the end of the war, still within positions of power. It's a terrifying thought as to what could have been. I mean, Philip K. Dick has this to say on his research process in regards to the Nazi regime. Once again, taken from philipkdickfans.com. Quote, I did 7 years of research for The Man in the High Castle. 7 years of research. It took me 7 years to amass the material on the Nazis and the Japanese, especially on the Nazis. And that's probably the reason why it's a better novel than most of my novels. I knew what I was talking about. I had prime source material at the Berkeley Cow Library right from the Gestapo's mouth. Stuff that had been seized after World War II. Stuff that was marked for the eyes of the higher police only. I had to read what those guys wrote in their private journals in order to write The Man in the High Castle. End quote. Very good to show the amount of research that he's done, and I think it is highlighted throughout, especially, as he rightly says, from the German Nazi side. 7 years of research and you can't differentiate Chinese I Ching with Japanese ideology? That's a problem. I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot here by saying that. I gotta say, Philip K. Dick, God rest his soul, he's not with us anymore, but you can't espouse nearly a decade's worth of research on the one hand and then make something such a glaringly obvious mistake on the other. Like, it doesn't wash. It doesn't make sense. So either he didn't know, or he didn't care, or he assumed that the American public wouldn't know or care. Chilton visits the young Japanese couple from the beginning of the book for the dinner that they organized to help furnish their house and whatnot. They have dinner in an awkward manner, each seemingly trying to assimilate culturally with the other. Chilton's doing his best to be as Japanese as possible, but the Japanese couple seem to want nothing more than to be as American white as possible. They listen to big band music. They have steak for dinner, things like that. And I think Chilton's a little bit taken aback by this because he was assuming that he would be going in and having a traditional Japanese meal of some sort, some sake or whatever. And yet here he is, and all they want to do is be as English American as possible. It's this assimilation. And again, let's stress this right now. This couple are a couple of generations away or one generation away from the end of the war. And yet at the same time, because they're new to the country, just recently moved, I think this is why they're so fascinated with American culture and wanting to enjoy it and soak in it as much as possible. They didn't grow up there. They're not the first generation after the war to be born and raised in America. These are people that still speak with a heavy Japanese accent. Their English maybe isn't as good as it could be, things like that, but they have an interest in the culture. But ironically, it's a culture that they're taking away, which is why they're putting so much meaning into objects from that bygone era. It's an interesting dissection. It really is. But because of their attempts to assimilate with each other, neither are able to successfully do so. They keep kind of coming to loggerheads over it. But during the course of their dinner, he discovers the book The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. And they discuss the alternate reality that could have been. I mean, they even debate its merit as a sci-fi book, which is incredibly meta. And I fucking love meta anything. I'm a big fan of Community for this very reason, how good it is with its meta comedy and how it can set itself up and just rip itself apart for its own tropes. And here we are looking at this book by Philip K. Dick. I don't even know if the term meta existed back then when he was doing this. To have a book that is considered to not necessarily be sci-fi, that contains a book within it that is being debated as to whether it's sci-fi, that's glorious. That is great. How is that anything else but great? That level of meta-reflection actually comes back by the end of the chapter as well, when considering the book, Chilton ponders, quote, "Interesting book," he thought. "Odd nobody thought of writing it before," end quote. And I imagine that's the exact mindset that Philip K. Dick might have had in regards to this alternate reality he's presenting to us within his book. Again, it's just a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I think. I think this is directly Dick making a comment himself, using his book as a proxy to do so. He returns home, only to be confronted by a detective in his living room. He hands over a photo and asks Chilton to confirm if this was the man who came into his store claiming to represent a Japanese admiral. The guy who revealed that his guns were all fake. Remember him? I told you to remember him. Chilton looks at the photo and confirms, yes, this is the man. This is the guy who came in. The man in the photo is Frank Frink. We're then introduced, almost randomly, considering how we're nearly halfway into the story, to a Nazi named Hugo Rice, who's also reading Grasshopper. Everybody seems to be reading this fucking book. He hates it for what it stands for what it alludes to, for the fact that it shows the Reich falling. But he can't stop himself from reading it. His thoughts, especially in how he considers the Japanese as, quote, little yellow men, end quote, highlights the racial conflict that exists between Germany and Japan's tenuous relationship. So not only with Americans being under their rule, but Germany and Japan are also at loggerheads as well. They won the war. And yet there's this really heavy, palpable friction between the two of them. Frank and his business partner Ed have established their small business, Ed Frank Jewelry, and have already begun to create said jewelry for it. Now all they need to do is sell it to the stores to stock, which is a lot easier said than done, I think. On the journey over to Chilton's, Ed will attempt this one incidentally, because obviously Frank would be immediately recognized. Frank can only think of and pine for Juliana. We then cut to Juliana, who in the meantime, as Frank is pining for her, is fucking Joe. Yeah, they're having themselves a little grown-up fun time. Joe asks, "Don't you have to get to the gym?" "I'm not going to the gym," Juliana said to herself. "Don't you know that? We will go somewhere. We won't stay here too much longer, but we'll be a place we haven't been before. It's time." She's only just met him, and she's already putting a lot of stock into this new relationship immediately. Like, she met him in the diner. They've gone back and had this, what I assume initially would have been a one-night stand, but becomes so much more. And she's very bossy. She's very all over him in an emotional way, straight away. You know, we're getting out of here. We're going to do this. It's an odd stance for this character. I don't know what to make of it, if I'm perfectly honest. Mr. Baines got out his wallet. The Japanese seated himself with the wallet and began inspecting the contents. He halted at a photo of a girl. Very pretty. "My daughter, Martha." "I too have a daughter named Martha." Oh shit. We got ourselves some straight Batman v Superman stuff up in here as Baines finally gets to meet Tagami. and whatnot. But I thought that was a funny moment that I had to include, given how much of an issue everybody seemed to have with the whole Martha thing in Batman v Superman. And with the Ultimate Edition coming out soon, that may be something I will be reviewing for you guys. If that is this something that you want me to do, reach out to me on Twitter. You know what to do, @sweetstorybro, and let me know. Now, Juliana and Joe seem to have quite a contentious relationship. He seems to be quite unhinged. One tick that he's always doing that Juliana keeps mentioning is running his hands through his hair, pulling at it slightly, like he's slightly insane. Now, whilst driving Juliana to a big date, because they have started dating, and it wasn't just the one-off, they seem to have fallen into a relationship. Joe, as a trucker, missed his drive home initially, said that, when they come back, they'll pick me up, Things seem to be a little bit amiss with him. But as they're driving to their big date, Joe tells her the ending of the Grasshopper novel. Quote, "Britain wins," Joe said, indicating the book. "I save you the trouble. U.S. dwindles, Britain keeps needling and poking and expanding, keeps the initiative," end quote. So what's interesting about The Grasshopper Lies Heavy is the book isn't our history as alternate to their reality. It's just a novel predicting or giving another reality, perhaps a third reality that exists. But it's interesting that Philip K. Dick doesn't decide to just simply make it our reality. Off of Joe's suggestion, they decide to keep driving to the man in the high castle himself, the author of the Grasshopper novel, as he apparently doesn't live too far away from them. It seems a little coincidental because of where they're going. So, is there more to this? Is this just coincidence that where their big date happens to be, well, if we just keep going a little bit further, we can actually go see the author of The Man in the High Castle. We can go talk to him about this book. But of course, she's so swept up in it because she loves the book. She seems to be falling for Joe, and she definitely wants to talk to this author that she just goes, "Yeah, let's definitely do it. Let's just do it. That sounds like great. That's a great idea. Just put fucking pedal to the metal. Put your foot down. Fuck everything else. Just go." Meanwhile, the man that Baines has been waiting for, Yatabe, in order to have a confrontation meeting with Tagomi, has arrived. It turns out that Yatabe is a pseudonym, just like Baines, incidentally. Yatabe is actually a high-ranking general named Tadeki. The meeting is held, and Baines, Wegner, reveals a Reich plot to nuke the homelands of Japan, Operation Dandelion, before absorbing what's left into the Reich itself. And this was what he's there for the entire time. He's not a Swedish national. He is a spy. He's got the inside knowledge, basically, and he wants to be the whistleblower to the Japanese. The meeting with Tagomi was just a front to allow this meeting with Yatabe, or should I say Tadeki, honestly. This is where we also get to learn Baines' real name, which is Wegner. He's a German. Layers within layers as he tries to blow this thing wide open. Because for Germany, it's not enough. They want it all. Africa doesn't exist anymore. The population of Africa was completely wiped out. It was a complete genocide by the Germans. Africa is just a non-entity within this world. And it seems that that's what they want to do to Japan as well, before, as he says, absorbing what's left into the Reich. Frank is arrested on charge of forgery after having been highlighted by the photo presented to Chilton. He doesn't deny it, and he simply goes with the undercover cops. It's only when confronted with his original surname, Fink, and accused of Jewish ancestry, that he makes a break for it. Because he knows what they want to do to him, simply for being Jewish. He doesn't get away. Cuffed, they discuss the process of what's going to happen to him. He'll be sent to Germany and tried under German law, which could mean incineration. Two thugs break into the offices containing Baines, Tagomi, and Tadeki, and they attempt to kill Baines as the Reich is aware of what he is up to. Tagomi uses his own personal .44 to kill both the men, and this is a really interesting point for Tagomi's character. Remember this concept of he's trying to keep the evil at bay in little small ways, and yet here he is now having taken life. This sends him on an emotional downward spiral, one that'll continue to the end of the book for him, as Hideki relates to Baines how Tagomi must subscribe to the Buddhist tendencies. He was raised with these Taoist Buddhist ideologies, that all life is sacred. And yet here he is, having just shot 2 people and killed them dead in order to protect a German whistleblower. And the emotional fallout of what happens here, like I say, it stays with Tagomi for the rest of the novel. This is a turning point for him as a character. Joe and Juliana go shopping in preparation for their huge date night, the one that Joe has promised her. But it's not long before things begin to take a sinister turn. Despite Juliana's unjustified need to be treated like royalty, and this really gets to me because she really does come across as expectant and petulant, which I fucking hate, and she does that very much so. She comes across petulant and spoiled. Unbelievable. Joe is very short and sharp with her throughout these scenes. Like he's lost any means of even pretending to be patient with her. And whilst at the hotel, he just changes all their plans on the fly, deciding to go and visit the author that night, not the next night. And Juliana doesn't take this very well because they haven't gone out for dinner. She wants to go for a big show. She wants to be treated like a princess that she believes she deserves to be treated as before they then prescribe to the original plan of seeing the author tomorrow night. Why change everything? Why change all the plans? This is what we had set. Turns out Joe is a spy. The blonde hair he claimed to have had cut earlier and dyed as she was shopping is his real hair. Short and blonde. The black Italian hair, the whole thing of him being Joe, him being Italian, just a ruse. An absolute ruse. His mission is to kill the author of The Grasshopper Lies Heavy for anti-Reich material and propaganda. Quote, "Why do you need me along?" Juliana asks. Dialing, Joe said, "We have a folder on Abenson, and it seems he is attracted to a certain type of dark, libidinous girl. A specific Middle Eastern or Mediterranean type," end quote. Kind of describes Juliana. As their confrontation escalates, Juliana goes into the bathroom and retrieves some fresh shaving blades. She uses these to slice open Joe's throat. It's cold, man. The way that this is written is incredibly... It lacks emotion on both sides, and that's what's really weird about Juliana as a character. I mean, she's scared. She knows judo. She's intimidated, but at the same time, she does this, and she's so cold with it. Doesn't think twice. I mean, this is presented in a somewhat confusing manner as it's written, as he holds the wound closed with his hands as she exits the room completely naked. The hairdresser who was sent up for her shoos her back into the room, where she then gets dressed and simply leaves, as Joe, who is still somehow able to talk, continues to bleed out through his throat. She consults the oracle, the I Ching, which informs her, through her own personal interpretation of the results, that she must go and warn Absenden of the oncoming Gestapo hitmen. She calls the house, which is quite handily listed within the phone book. A different time, let's remember. And she has this to say to the wife of the author, Abenson. I quote, "I read his book and I drove all day up from Cannon City, Colorado. I'm in Greeley now. I thought I could make it to your place tonight, but I can't, so I want to know if I can see him sometime tomorrow?" End quote. This boggles my mind. Obviously, I'm putting it within the perspective, within the prism of it being 2016. But how presumptuous is this? How rude, how fucking invasive for a fan to simply call and go, "Yeah, I've driven a long time and I intend to see you, so I'm just going to come tomorrow and do that. Is that okay?" No way is that okay. I can't even fathom that this was okay back then. It boggles my mind, especially now where fandom has gotten to a point where it's almost dangerous in a lot of places. You know, like people getting hacked, people being stalked, details, personal information, loved ones having tabs put on them, all ridiculous things because the internet connects everyone so closely now, even the fucking weirdos. It's odd, and her attitude is just completely wrong. And again, Juliana is just such an odd character because of this. Like she seems to be quite strong. She knows judo. She can look after herself to a degree. And yet at the exact same time, she's cold. She's just as manipulative, and she's so expectant. I think that's the worst thing about her character, is this level of expectancy. I'm going to do this. We're going to do this. Why? Because I want to. It's weird. It's an odd one. On the San Francisco trolley sits Tagomi, lost in his own mind, unsure what to think, what to do, who he is now, having done what he's done. Until he determines to sell his Colt 44 to Childen, who refuses it. He visits the store, he offers the gun. Childen immediately denies it, given his poor history in purchasing and attempting to sell firearms and then discovering that they're fake. But he does ask him something. Childen asks, was there a special reason why you wanted to trade that item in? Tagomi goes on to reply, no, he said, once more concealing his personal world, as it should be, end quote. And again, I find this very interesting. This is commentary on Japanese culture. It seems to be so hit and miss compared to the Nazi Reich. It is an interesting observation of Japanese culture, that much is true. But considering what I've seen other authors espouse regarding not writing in generalizations and broad brushstrokes about other cultures, etc., as nobody truly knows the culture other than those who live it. This is something that I've been taught time and time again, and I see it I follow a bunch of people on Twitter, like writers and writer motivation stuff and things like that. And one of the things that you see a lot is don't attempt to write another culture, because all you will end up doing is writing it through your own personal prism. And if you aren't a part of that culture, you generalize. And once you generalize, you start stereotyping, and you just write in these broad brushstrokes, which does nobody any favors. In theory, that's true. And in all actuality, in practice, that's true in a lot of things as well. I would argue that this is true for The Man in the High Castle, actually. Here we have Philip K. Dick writing about consulting the Oracle, quoting its script, and commenting on Asian culture, yet confusing Chinese for Japanese, scripture, belief systems, the whole shebang, really. Childen showcases the Ed Frank jewelry to Tagomi that he's taken on a commission. He's not paid for them. He's showcasing them, and if people buy them, then they get a cut back. Tagomi initially isn't interested, but as he's leaving, he turns around and decides to purchase a piece in an attempt to find peace with himself. Again, they're imbuing objects with meaning in what it represents. Childen advertises the jewelry as the new wave of American art. And this in itself is huge, because he's only ever dealt with antiques before. So for his character to take in new works, take in new art, and try to sell it to those who are coming in specifically for the antiquities of the old age, it shows him taking a pride in what America can be again. And it's always so interesting, because these are all men dealing with the jewelry. Quote, he felt better. Sometimes one must try anything, he decided. It is no disgrace. On the contrary, it is a sign of wisdom, of recognizing the situation, end quote. I absolutely love this line. Tagomi's justification, if he needed justification at all for purchasing this, in order to try find peace within himself by looking at this, by owning this thing. But it's the concept, it's this ideal, this idea. Sometimes one must try anything. It is of no disgrace. In fact, it's a sign of wisdom. To try, to fail, to try again. It's a good message, and I think it was conveyed brilliantly through a man who's become broken and has nothing left because he doesn't know who he is anymore. He doesn't know his place in the world anymore. He sits in the park and analyzes the jewelry piece, begging it to tell him its secrets. It's weird, he attempts to reach a nirvana state of internal understanding with the help of this new American art. I don't think I've ever looked at anything in that same way. I don't think I've ever purchased anything and looked at it in the hopes of I'm going to find myself in this, because I don't think you can. I don't think that exists. I think you can't see yourself or find the answer in an object. I can't buy a Kinder Egg and then know who I am on every level. I can't buy what's another good example? Like an action figure and then look at it and be like, yeah, I know everything about me now. I know who I am. I don't think that shit works, but hey, man, different cultures, different beliefs, and within Philip K. Dick's take on it, this is what they're doing. So, he tries to reach that nirvana state. Why? I don't really know. He just does. But in doing so, he must have achieved some sort of understanding on a higher plane as he shifts realities without knowing it. And this is the huge moment. It builds up to this point. It seems like out of left field. I can't lie. This seems out of left field within the book, to have been towing the line of sci-fi, being light sci-fi, and then boom, full in sci-fi, just straight in there, all the way in, Yeah, And he doesn't even realize it. This is quite cleverly done, actually, especially when he asks the man about the construction of a bridge he'd never seen before. So it's the same but different. He enters a diner where everybody is sitting down, all white Americans. Nobody stands up to give him his seat, and he calls them out on it, and they slur him with some prejudiced sayings, which takes him by surprise, because this isn't his America. This isn't what he knows. And this is, again, to highlight the fact that we're in someplace different. His meditation is interrupted by policemen, and that's the moment he's snapped into a reality fully that isn't his. Quote, "Where am I? Out of my world, my space and time. The silver triangle disoriented me. I broke from my moorings and hence stand on nothing." End quote. He does manage to ground himself once more, returning to the bench, worried that he had lost the piece of jewelry, but it slipped through. It was on the ground. His briefcase was there as well. Scared to leave the bench in case he was still lost in space and time, he calls down 2 Chinese boys to check if any of the pedicabs are present, the ones that the Chinese drive. They run, they check. There are. He's home. That's how he knows. The fact that there are pedicabs present, whereas in the other reality there weren't, as well as the heavy anti-Japanese mindset that he came across. And that's where the season of the TV show ended. In fact, we didn't even get him to come back. He just ended there within that modern America, as I was talking about. So all of this that came after was new to me and I was very interested because of it. He returns to his offices where he meets with Herr Rice, the German that was randomly introduced about halfway through the story, if you remember. He's there investigating the killing of the 2 thugs. Here we get an interesting parallel between the two and how their nations are fundamentally different from one another. To quote from the book, "Let's shake a gentleman's agreement to this. It's unworthy, especially in these critical times when any stupid publicity might inflame the mob mind to the detriment of both our nation's interests," says Rice. "Guilt, nonetheless, is on my soul," Mr. Tagomi said. "Blood, Herr Rice, can never be irradiated by ink." End quote. At this point, Tagomi receives an order through that requires his signature. What could this be for? It's actually an approval form for the transportation of Frank to Germany. He refuses to sign it because of what it represents. Frank is then released and returns to his headquarters, the jewelry headquarters, where Ed is eating a sandwich or some such thing, eating his dinner at the very least, and immediately gets to work crafting more jewelry. He's been given a second chance at life. And I guess he wants to spend it doing the one thing that Philip K. Dick didn't want to do, which was work within jewelry. But I think it's more about what it represents than what it is. The idea of a new cultural identity. This is American jewelry. This is new American art, is what it represents. That's what it means so much to these men and children as well. He ended up taking that exact message from the jewelry he was stalking. At first, he was so dismissive about it, but by the end, when he was talking to Tagomi, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't had before in relation to it. Baines, Wagner, is apprehended by the Reich when landing back in Germany. They know who he is. They know what he's done. And he probably doesn't make out of this alive, which is a shame. But his supposed death, because I don't believe, unless I'm misremembering, we don't get a death scene for him. It's just heavily inferred. But him doing what he did has saved millions of lives within the Japanese islands. Juliana prepares to visit Abenson. She reads up about Joe's death in the paper, casually, by the way. They don't know her real name. They assume that she was his wife, and they have no details on her. So she's pretty much got away with flat-out murder of, yes, a German spy, but murder nonetheless. She thinks this, should I say, in relation to the grasshopper lies heavy. Quote, "What is it Abenson wanted to say? Nothing about his make-believe world. Am I the only one who knows? I'll bet I am. Nobody else really understands grasshopper but me. They just imagine they do." End quote. Yo, seriously, she sounds insane. She sounds deluded. Delusions of grandeur and import. Stalker-esque. Nobody gets what you're trying to say but me. Nobody understands you but me. She arrives at Abenson's house, interrupting a party that's in full swing. His son answers the door, calls for his mom. The mom comes. They go, "Hey, I spoke to you on the phone yesterday. I told you I'm the guy I'm the woman who read the book and drove a really long way to see you. And I told you I was coming around, regardless of how you felt about it." That's pretty much what happened. She demands answers, claiming to be, quote, entitled to them. I just can't get behind this attitude. This how she is, her personality. But she does consider herself to be entitled, considering she is murdered to keep them safe. She killed Joe because Joe wanted to kill him. One death to offset the life of somebody else. Entitled in that way, I suppose I can be a little bit more forgiving and understanding, but still, again, it's so weird. She's certainly not a good guy. She seems unhinged herself. We get another little time slip where we're not sure what reality could be existing within this house. Juliana says, "The Gestapo file said you're attracted to women like me." Benson replies, "There hasn't been a Gestapo since 1947. End quote. It's the concept of the time slip again. Maybe a reality slippage, just in the same way that Tagomi had within the park. We discover that Benson used the Oracle to write the book itself, crafting from its messages, every time he would throw the sticks, the story where Germany loses the war. He wrote the book just as much as the Oracle did, just as much as the I Ching did. But it's a weird thing. Like they kind of directly mentioned like he didn't want to take credit for it, but at the same time, he did do the work on it too. It's an odd one, I got to say. I mean, Juliana wants to use the Oracle at this point. She wants to reference to the I Ching and ask a question regarding the grasshopper lies heavy. Quote, "Oracle, why did you write the grasshopper lies heavy? What are we supposed to learn?" What comes back, the meaning, what they get from the answer that is provided from the book. Abenson leads this part of the conversation. He starts by saying, "It means, does it, that my book is true?" "Yes," she said. With anger, he said, "Germany and Japan lost the war." Juliana replies, "Yes." End quote. And with this revelation, Juliana implores him to carry a weapon to keep himself safe, just in case the Gestapo, just in case the Reich continue to try and take his life, and she leaves. Truth, she thought, as terrible as death, but harder to find. Nice line, I like that. She leaves, searching for a cab to take her back to her motel. How did he come to this ending? How did Philip K. Dick come to this as the end? How was this a natural conclusion point for his writing? I mean, she confronts the author. Everything he said within the book is true, and yet they're living in a reality where it's obviously not true, yet it is true at the exact same time. There's no definite answer here, just theorizing. It's all hypotheticals. And she simply goes back to her motel. Nothing else ever happens from that. She goes, "Keep yourself safe. Hey man, keep yourself safe. Buy a weapon. Take care of yourself. I'll never see you again. Goodbye." And then that's it. It's over. It ends. How is that the ending? It seems so abrupt. It still leaves a lot of questions unanswered. A lot of questions were answered, granted, but we're still living within this is this real? Is this not real? Are there multiple universes that slip into one another? His house, I mean, he says there's no Gestapo, but there is? Taken from an interview with Vertex in 1974, Philip K. Dick notes that at points he used the I Ching in the same way that his characters did. In fact, I have the quote here that I pulled for you. And I quote, "In each case, when they asked a question, I threw the coins and wrote the hexagram lines they got. That governed the direction of the book. Like in the end, when Juliana Frink is deciding whether or not to tell Hawthorne Abinson that he is the target of assassins, the answer indicated that she should. Now, if it had said not to tell him, I would have had her not go there." End quote. Okay, all right. I know he mentioned it earlier, like the done thing, the hipster done thing was the I Ching within that area at the time, but every time they asked a question, he would consult the book and then allow the I Ching to help write his book, just like Appinson allowed it to help him write his book. Meta, levels within levels, writing what you know. It's refreshing. It's interesting. Sort of unsatisfactory, but at the same time, so much of the best sci-fi always leaves you wanting more. It really does. Because for every time it answers one question, it poses two more. Philip K. Dick actually does have something to say on that ending, and this is taken from a website called kirkusreviews.com. He says this, and believe me, this puts a few things in odd context. Quote, "That's why the ending is so unresolved. I did throw the coins for the characters, and I did give what the coins got, the hexagrams, and I was faithful to what the I Ching actually showed. But the I Ching copped out completely, and it left me stranded," end quote. So it worked up until a point, and at the point that it stopped working, it just ends. She leaves. I mean, where else could it have gone? Could he not have asked, like, where does Juliana go? Throw it there. What does Juliana do? Throw it there. Does Frank and Juliana get back together? Throw it there. Do they even contact one another? There. What does Children do? There's a lot of unanswered questions. Togomi, where does he go from here? Especially when he's perceived as the main character. What's next for him? Does he learn about Bane's death? Is he in danger because he was privy to the meeting with Tadeki? What happens with Operation Dandelion? Does that go ahead? There's a lot of unanswered questions here. A lot of speculation. But that is the end of The Man of the High Castle. She confronts the author. She goes home. That's it. She gets her answers. Is it real? Yes, but it's not her reality, because as soon as she steps out the door, she's back in the reality where Germany and Japan won. It's interesting. I do like it. It challenges you. It forces conversation. It doesn't lead you by the hand, and it doesn't fucking baby step you. Just like at the very beginning, it drops you into that culture, into this concept. I wanted to end this review, this in-depth dissection of The Man in the High Castle, with this quote from Philip K. Dick, again, taken from philipkdickfans.com, and how he approached writing the novel. Quote, "Mostly I wrote it for the editor. To me, it wasn't the reader who bought it. It was the editor who bought it. It was as simple as that. The big change came when I wrote The Man in the High Castle, because the book was not written for Donald Walheim. I had sold Time Out of Joint, and had gotten the idea of selling a hardcover novel. With Man in the High Castle, I had no concept of an audience at all. I had no concept even of an editor. It was a pure relationship between me and the characters in the novel, and it stayed pretty much that way." End quote. He wrote the book to escape a job that he hated, and he wrote the novel that he would have wanted to read, filled with characters that he felt a connection with. That last line again. It was a pure relationship between me and the characters in the novel, and it stayed pretty much that way. End quote. I love that. I think it's really interesting. Again, so much of what you learn when you first start out wanting to be a writer, when you first take those tentative steps. And I'm still taking those tentative steps. I'm not published. I'm not anything like that, as you guys well know. Not yet, at least. Knock on wood. You write what you know. You write what you would want to read. And you create characters that you can relate to and you care about. I've given plenty of examples throughout this in-depth discussion and dissection with you that show you that Philip K. Dick did exactly that. And if he can do it and then go on to be considered one of the best sci-fi writers of all time, you can do it too. I can do it too. Because, to relate it back to what Kev Smith said, and you can read it on my blog post at writestevewright.com, like I said earlier, your voice is your currency, and I do believe that. We each have a unique look on life that allows you to have a specific say that only you would be able to share. So if you have the inkling, if you have the inclination to share it in a creative way, do it. It's scary. There's no answers. There's a lot of question marks. Believe me, I know. But do it, because you'll feel so much better for it. I'm right now in the very early stages of starting to formulate another novel idea. As I try to ramp Temporary up as something to sell, to get an agent for, it's time to start looking towards the future. I can't write Temporary forever. Temporary's been sitting on my hard drive for a long time as I talk about getting in an agent, which I haven't done yet. Shame on me, absolutely. But what next? If I go into that meeting and I say, we love Temporary, but what next? What else can you give us? Well, now I have something that I'm working on that I can give you. Prior, I didn't have that. And it's a very exciting idea. I'm very much looking forward to exploring this world, although there's going to be scary research involved, because it's going to be steeped in religion, and it's going to be focused on demons and angels and cool things like that. But that's neither here nor there. So we come into the ending of this podcast for Philip K. Dick's Man of the High Castle. And we need to determine whether it's officially too sweet or just not sweet enough. Honestly, The Man of the High Castle, it's an oddly written, sometimes difficult style to easily read. I found myself lost a couple times within the paragraphs, having to reread a couple of things like that. It's a somewhat culturally confused take on an incredible and amazingly simple, beautiful in its simplicity, the concept, the idea, the kernel of the idea of what this book is. Germany and Japan win World War II. That alone, you put that's a sentence on a piece of paper. People want to know that alternate story, what could happen. It's just so immediately engaging and interesting. I mean, it's a sci-fi book that comments on its own credibility as a sci-fi book with meta juxtaposition to the book within a book, The Grasshopper Lies Heavy. It's clever, engaging, and absorbing in its credible alternate reality. Honestly, The Man in the High Castle is officially too sweet. So I just want to take this moment to say thank you for listening, and be sure to let me know what you think on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, email, whatever you want, man. And if you want to check out the story itself, why not purchase it via the Amazon links on sweetstorybro.com? Not only the place to go for every social media link and the podcast itself, but also a handy means for you to make your Amazon purchases. It's no more expensive for you, and it kicks back a small percentage to help the show. You don't get charged anymore, and you're helping me out. It's a win-win. So thank you if you were to do that. Also, it is a TV show, so why not go check that out on Amazon Prime or buy the DVD? Again, the Amazon links through sweetstorybro.com. And be sure to subscribe to the YouTube so you don't miss any future sweet updates regarding the Uncharted retrospective playthroughs or any other playthroughs I might do for the podcast. This could be one of the very last times you hear this show in the state that you have come to know it as, this in-depth dissection, beat for beat, plot point for plot point, to help understand writing better, to help understand character arcs better. I'm so interested in knowing what you as an audience want from this show. I'm happy to evolve. I'm so open to feedback. It's crazy. All you need to do is just let me know. Like I say, this could be the last one of it in this style. And it would be kind of sad, honestly, if it was, because this podcast exists to help me be a better writer. I've never lied about that. I've never hid that from you guys. In order to be a better writer, I need to understand writing, the art of writing, character arcs, character development, progression, all these things on a better level. So to interact with these stories and to dissect them like this, as you heard from this review, you saw the character arcs. You remember the things there are certain things that you knew you had to remember that could be called back to later on. Everything has a purpose. And this has really helped me. But that's neither here nor there. I want to give you the show you want. And I can still get these things. I can still get that enjoyment and get that understanding from these products, because I'll just be, immersing myself with them in a way that I hadn't done before. but then just giving you a more rounded review. Again, I can't stress this enough. The shows would be shorter, but they may be more engaging for you. Because my thinking on this, hey, I'm all for transparency on this show. I'm all for honesty on this show. My thinking behind this was some people might be turned off from the show because they would see this review, go, oh, I've read Man in the High Castle. That's awesome. Let's see what you think. Oh, why is it why is it an hour and a half? And then for me to go through plot point by plot point, and they're like, what? I know this story. Why are you telling me this? I know all this. Just tell me what you think. Well, that's kind of the reason why I've been rethinking changing the format, or thinking about changing the format in the first place. For those that are looking just for a review, I can give that to you. If you enjoy the current in-depth style, I can continue giving that to you. You just need to let me know what you want. And the Twitter poll, again, that'll be down. But you know what? It doesn't stop you from having your say. Sweet Story Bro on Twitter, Facebook, email. Let me know. I'll tell you what, man. I know that was a little tangent, but if you like this episode, leave me a tip, a couple bucks maybe. Rather than tipping that dude who did a subpar service for you as a waiter, hey, if I just gave you some enjoyment and an insight into a story that you never really looked at it that way before, if you enjoyed the quotes and the research that I've done, a tip would be greatly appreciated. A couple bucks maybe, like I say, less than a cup of coffee or anything like that, and it helps the show so much, I can't tell you. And you can easily do this by going to paypal.me/sweetstorybro. That's paypal.me/sweetstorybro. So be sure to share the show with your story-loving friends. Share the love. Spread the conversation of a good story or sometimes a just not sweet enough story, but still worth sharing nonetheless. And until next time, be sure to keep your eyes on Twitter for the Monday mention. And I implore you, go enjoy some stories. I'm out. Hey man, if you enjoyed today's episode of Sweet Story Bro reviewing Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, and you're interested in hearing that story or reading that story yourself, well, why not jump over to audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. Over there, you can download yourself a free audiobook, as well as signing up for their service for a free 30-day trial to see if you enjoy what they can deliver to you. And while you're there, I told you can get a free audiobook. Why not download Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle itself, read by Jeff Cummings and not costing you a single cent or pence depending where you're from. And like I said, you can get that for free today from audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro.